All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of 300 to 3000. I am one of your hosts, Spencer Sutton. I have with me my co-host, Matthew Whitaker. Welcome back to the show, Matthew.
Thank you, Spencer. Really excited about our next iteration of PM Veterans and excited about our guest today.
All right, well, why don't you introduce this guest? I know that you guys go way back.
Yep, I'm very excited today to have Robert Locke. Robert and I have known each other for as long as I've been in the business. I remember my first time meeting Robert. I think it was at a national convention, and then I was kind of consistently going over to the Atlanta NARPM chapter. Just a little bit about him, just for our guests. Robert used to own Crown Realty and Management, which he sold. But he's been in the business for 40 years. So very rarely do you get somebody that's been around and seen this thing for as long as Robert has. He obviously has trained. This is where I ran into him. He's trained in the NARPM world. If you haven't seen a Robert Locke class, then you're missing out, because he teaches soup to nuts property management. It's incredible. And, really pumped to have him on here, because you want to talk about somebody that has seen this industry change and gone through everything from starting a property management business to he's got a great story about how he downsized this business, which we'll talk about, and then grew it back and sold his business to one of these big institutional players. But Robert, before we jump in, I'd love to welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Yeah, we do go back a little ways, don't we?
We do. I've actually had dinner at your house and met your lovely wife. You definitely, like me, outkicked your coverage and loved getting to meet her. So, we do have a great relationship, and I honor that, and very excited that you were willing to take some time to be on the show.
You bet. I've been looking forward to it. By the way, I've met your bride as well, obviously, and one of the things we have in common is we married up.
Yep, we sure did.
There's no doubt. Yeah. Well, I know that's true in Matthew's case for sure. What's interesting, when I first joined Evernest, Matthew, you told me about Robert, and you're like, you need to meet Robert. And so one day I talked Robert into letting me come and just sit down and interview him. And so I did. I came all the way. He said, come over to my house. It'll be quieter. So we went, we sat, and he talked to me probably for a couple of hours. And out of that came a post that I wrote, which was all about how to keep a tenant for 20 years. Now, Robert, you had a tenant that stayed in one of your houses for 20 years. We sat there and talked about that, and you gave me some just incredible information that I was able to then turn and share with a lot of investors, which I thought was really generous of you. So great to have you on the show. We look forward to introducing you to our audience.
Love it. Thanks for the invite, guys. I've been looking forward to it myself.
So, Robert, I often joke, nobody gets into property management intentionally. We usually fall into this business. So I'd be curious. I don't know that I've even heard the story about how you got into property management. So I'd love for you to kick it off with that.
Well, I was a securities dealer when I moved to Atlanta in the late 70s. And I was kind of getting bored with it. I've been in it for about 12 years. And a class popped up in a local newspaper called Making It Big on Little Deals. It was done by John Schaub out of Sarasota, Florida. He came to Atlanta. And I did a Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, why and how to buy single family houses. And man, I drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, it absolutely set me on fire. And it wasn't to buy apartments. It wasn't big deals. It was little things what you and I and most people can get their head around. So a couple of years later, we had about 6 rentals, and I kind of ran out of money. I couldn't keep doing it because it took a little money to do it. And so I had investor clients, and I loved going out and talking to people who had their home for sale. Typically, it was expired listings or for sale by owners. And I would sit with a yellow scratch pad in their home, and I'd talk to them until it got to the point where we could start pulling out a purchase and sale agreement and filling it out. So since I'd run out of money, I had to go sell houses to investors. And every one of them would say, Robert, I'll buy it. You know the rest, right? I'll buy it if you'll manage it.
Yep.
And so in 1980, I had a real estate license in Michigan back from 73. So I've been licensed for 50 years.
Oh, gosh.
So in Atlanta, I got my license in 1980 and set up a management company and started doing management for other people. Okay, that was 1980.
1980. Actually, the year I was born.
Is that right?
It was, yeah, 1980.
Right?
Now, yeah, Spencer was born way before me, but yeah, 1980 was the year I was born. And another, I want to tie back to our story too, because just like you went to a conference or some sort of weekend event and heard about how much money somebody was making in real estate, I heard from a good friend of mine how much money Spencer was making in real estate in 2004. And that's what got me into buying and selling houses, very similarly to you. And I spent time, Spencer and I go back almost 20 years. I spent time with Spencer and his partner at the time, and I would ride around and watch them buy houses. And I just thought that was the sexiest business ever, just to wake up every day and just go do deals, and how fun that would be. So I didn't realize that both of us got into this business very similarly.
Well, and to grow that, I discovered along the way that my clients whose properties I was managing was a target-rich environment. And I would buy, not a lot, 2 to 3 houses a year, some years 1. And typically, the call went something like this: Robert, I just got divorce papers. Or Robert, I've just got transferred to Denver. Or Robert, I just lost my job and I want to dump my house. How can you make that happen? And my standard pitch would be, well, I just bought a house. I'm out of money, but I know somebody that might want to. I can sell it for you or buy it from you. I just don't have any money right now.
Yeah.
And I can take the mortgage off your hands. I learned how to buy subject to. Mm-hmm. And after buying 2 or 3 like that, I realized, oh my gosh, burned out landlords are one of the great hidden sources of buying houses. And so we began to farm that and say to investors, you know, if you ever want to bail out, we have other investors standing in line to look.
Yeah, that's a great way to make sure that you keep that house too, right? Like to go ahead and plant the seed with the investor that you don't want to lose it off your platform.
You bet. Yeah, you bet.
So
Except Crown charged me a little bit less in management fees than the retail client.
So let's kind of roll in. So Crown, you kind of get started. You're starting to add these homes. They'll buy them if you'll manage them. Talk about what the 80s looked like, and I also want you to know, I want to know like what Crown looked like, but I also want to understand what this industry looked like in terms of nationally, if you were zooming out, what the industry would look like.
Well, 3 things. It wasn't until the late 80s that the industry, the vendors to the industry started coming about. Remember, we didn't have tenant screening services till 83, 85. You know, it just the ability to find people to help you do your business was arduous. It was too new. I think Mike Nelson and I were the only 2 people in Atlanta that would actually hold up the flag. I manage rental properties professionally. I mean, for a living. Mm-hmm. Everybody, you know, people would manage 3 or 5, or some brokerage firm might manage 20, but there was really no industry group. In fact, NARPM wasn't even in existence until the late 80s and early 90s. And our chapter meetings, when NARPM came around, there were all 4 of us around a table at a restaurant. That was the Atlanta chapter for NARPM, 35 years ago. So the biggest challenge is we didn't have the vendors. We had no property management software.
What did you do? So like you got, let's say rent comes in, and I would imagine it didn't ACH at the time. You had to like physically get a check or maybe even cash.
I remember giving tenants in a packet 12 envelopes with a mail label seal on it with our address, and give them 12 payment envelopes so they could mail the rent in.
Yeah. So there's no excuses about sending it to the wrong place.
You guys got it so easy. I hear whining about, how tough property management is. You have no idea. Picture this. This is the truth. I'm not making this up. We would sit around a conference table every month. Now picture this, 800 rentals. We would print the owner statement, print them. We would then print the check. Hopefully, we sit around the table, the conference table, 10 of us. Hopefully, we get the check attached to the right owner statement.
Yeah, hopefully it matched.
You never want to get one off when you're doing that. And not
I'm telling you. Then you'd fold it up, you'd stick it in an envelope and put a mail label on it, hopefully the right mail label for that owner. Then you'd go to the postage machine. Now, we had little sponges to seal the envelopes, 800 of them. I mean, it was a 2.5, 3 hour process at the
every month. Every month. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like you did it once.
Bring in lunch. We would have, we'd have sodas. We'd have music playing. This was a ritual every single month. Okay?
I wouldn't be able to take it. I couldn't take it. I'd be done. I couldn't do it.
We would go to the postage machine, and everybody would take a 20-minute postage machine tour, where we put the envelope in and hit the postage machine. We put it in boxes, plastic mailboxes, and take it to the post office.
Yep. I'll tell you a funny story.
Manual. Everything
Robert,
manual.
Everything manual. I'll tell you a funny story, Robert. We bought a business about 6 years ago from a guy who had been doing this a really long time. And he didn't quite trust the ACH, being able to ACH out to his clients. So what he would do, his version of the ACH was he had 7 checks that he would print for his clients, and he would physically drive to their banks and deposit them on their behalf. And like when we bought the business, we were like, hey, you can just like hit a button now and have that direct deposited into their account. And he just didn't trust it. But I would imagine that's kind of like how things used to get done. If you wanted to be full service, not only would you print the check, but you may even drive it to the bank for people.
Don't laugh, but when Betty and I started, we did this in the basement of our home. And when we signed up an owner, we would get 12 deposit tickets for the owner's bank account.
Yeah.
And we would go deposit money in their banks the first 3 to 5 years.
So owners have always magically had money appear in their bank in this industry.
That's right.
It was just a lot more manual.
They didn't know what went into it.
Used to be.
Yep. Now, back then there was Skyline and I'll think of the other one, Yardi. See, Yardi and Skyline had software for the apartment industry.
Right.
We would hook into that. It was kind of patchwork together because it was really designed for one owner, right? The owner of the apartment building.
Right.
But it did allow us to collect rent, put it in a computer system, and distribute it. It was just really clunky because it was not designed for our business. You guys today, the 10th of the month comes, you push a button, all the money goes, you go back to your nap.
That's right.
Easy now.
Yeah. But no, Robert, you forgot the point where we complain about how hard it is to manage rental properties.
Whine.
It actually just gives us more time. It gives us way more time to complain about managing rental homes.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to the story, 1980s, how big did your business get? How many homes did you manage at any one point in the 80s? Do you kind of recall?
No, but it was under 200. When we did the Olympics in 96, we were managing 300. And all of that, Matthew, came from selling houses to investors.
Right.
In other words, there was no organic growth. There was no website. Nobody was drawing people out of the woods, out of the woodwork to manage for a fee only. All of my clients through the 80s and the early 90s, until websites started coming toward us and we could use a website, we were only managing for clients we sold houses to. So it was a lot more relational. We knew who they were. We could call them and talk to them. But it wasn't until, NARPM had a trade show and somebody would show up with a property management software package, right? And you know who they were way back in the beginning, right? Promise wasn't even Promise back then, but they were one of the very first ones. We were one of the first management companies with a website. I mean, people in Atlanta were managing rentals, didn't have a website.
One of the things that I think people don't know about NARPM is it was actually a Promise user event. That's kind of how it started, correct? Is that all the people that had maybe you can like provide some clarity, but I thought it was basically just a bunch of users of Promise software got together on a consistent basis.
That's not bell at all.
That's not true. I just made that up.
Well, probably not. Rumors are rumors. What can you say?
Yeah.
Old war stories from the old parts in the business.
So you go through kind of the 90s. The business obviously starts to professionalize some. You get websites, you get property management software, and then you kind of get into the 2000s. And the 2000s was kind of a hot time to be in the business, right? I mean, people were buying houses like crazy. Spencer was flipping deals. I mean, Spencer used to be a big shot. Most people don't know that he was a big shot in the house flipping business, but
Home
short time. That's
Man,
correct. Home investors. That's right.
He was a home investors king. He was, when we would go to a conference, they would basically parade him in like he was the king. He would sit in one of those big throne chairs, and 4 people would have to bring him into the conference.
Now, when people came in, Spence, when people came in, did they just bow just a little bit?
They did. They did. All I cared about was if Matthew was bowing. That's all I really worried about. No, that's not the way. That's not the way I remember it.
Well, 2000 was a big turning point for us in 2 or 3 ways. Number one, we had built a really bad model. I'm going to do a series of videos on how to build a bad model. We were at about 750 properties in year 2000. And I had done the Olympic program, and a good friend of mine kind of was running the business. And we really built a model that was not profitable. In other words, one of the mistakes we made is we kind of took on anybody that wanted property management, we would say yes. So we picked up a 35-unit, $550 a month apartment building where the pool hadn't been cleaned out for 20 years. There were bites and bodies, and the pool was just full of junk. Our average rent began to really drop. We took on a lot of properties that were an hour plus away from the office. We did a lot of low-end stuff because that's where people needed property managers, especially with the low-end rents. And we really built a bad model. And so in year 2000, with about 12 staff, 750 properties, we kind of did a controlled crash. We downsized from 750 to 300 in 10 weeks.
Wow.
I had to pull my staff in. I let 8 people go, and I had to pull them in and tell them what was going on. And in 10 weeks, we sold buckets of property accounts by zip code to competitors who kind of had the same fuzzy thinking we did. More volume equals better. See, that was a mistake because there's bad volume.
Right.
You can't manage $600 a month trailers. You can't manage, low end stuff and really make any money. So we kind of let go a lot of our properties and kind of took it down to the base of the houses we were selling people, which in Atlanta that time was an $1,100-$1,200 a month model. Now, it's different in different states, right? Northern California average rent's $3,500. Alabama, it's $350. So we kind of figured in the Georgia model and the Atlanta model the price point that got us the kind of tenant we wanted to deal with was that 1,100-1,200. It was kind of over $1,000 a month. And so we crashed it from 750 down to 300. And then we kind of started out from our core business model, which was managing for people we'd sold houses to. Now, after that, we took on properties, but we kept it in that price point.
Right.
And then 15 years later is when we sold out. And our average rent at that time was $1,350.
So at this time in 2000, when you downsized, like did a controlled crash, were you also still selling properties to investors?
Yeah.
Like, were you okay?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, there was that went in a cycle because Spencer, there were years when there was tons of financing available for investors. There were years where there was no money available for investors. Gotcha. So you just had to kind of go with the cycle as to when it was a good time to buy or you work with investors.
Right.
Okay.
Gotcha.
It just kind of, there were times you did, times you didn't. There were times where we shifted into lease purchase. We did a ton of lease purchases when the real estate market slowed down. We did lease purchases with builders. We did lease purchases with owners. We did about 450 of them, made a killing. It was fabulous business. And money was available for the tenant to buy when they got to the end of their lease purchase. Right. So there were years we closed 3 out of 5. There were years we didn't close 1 out of 5. It just depended on was there financing available. So you had to be a chameleon. You had to shift and move where the market was going and do different things in order to continue to flourish and grow your business.
And, you know, as you kind of like grew your business over that next 15 years, you actually ended in a sale. What year did you sell your business, Robert?
2015.
2015. So that's hard to believe. It's been almost 7 years now since you sold your business.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Now you're sleeping better. We were talking before we jumped on the air that all the weight's been lifted off your shoulders. It's a good thing when you sell your business. So, but talk about, kind of the years building up and maybe even kind of take us through the sale process and kind of maybe some lessons that you learned through the sale process.
Well, I was, Mike Nelson and I were kind of the 2 larger players in town. There were a lot of medium players, but Mike and I were both leaning into a lot of continuing education classes. You got to remember in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't find any CE credit in the property management world. There's very little training going on. But through the, in the early 2000s and stuff is when Monica and I met. And we started doing workshops together and started partnering and doing a lot of business. And it grew because when you did searches, Property Management Atlanta, Mike and I vied back and forth for first place in the generic listings. And so both of us developed a lot of organic growth by learning keyword searches and how to do SEO. I mean, these were the years when everybody was fighting for eyeballs on the internet. A lot of people came into the NARPM chapters during those periods of time, and some of them were really smart. I mean, guys like Todd Reed and Andy Wrighton, who came out of technology worlds, boy, they figured out how to do, paid advertising and pay-per-clicks and all that kind of stuff. So the learning curve for using the internet and property management software was very steep in those years. I mean, it was just a race to see who could bring in, properties. At our high point, we were signing up 25 to 30 a month. We were doing leases between 45 and 60 a month in the summer.
Wow.
So, I mean, we had a machine going. We grew it to 1,000, 1,100. I think our peak was 1,150 properties. But coming up near 2015, I was in my late 60s, and it was time to kind of put it on the market. Betty had retired out of the business. She really didn't want to own the business if Robert, got hit by a truck. And so it was gushing money. I really didn't want to sell it that much. but I was 70 years old. It was kind of time, if it was ever going to happen, that I would do it rather than leave it to Betty to do it. And so I met with a great financial planning firm that I'd known for years here in Atlanta, Ron Blue and Company. They had a mergers and acquisitions department. I contracted with them, put an executive summary together, and then, kind of quietly went out there in the marketplace looking for a buyer. I had, in about an 18-month period of time, I had 7 letters of intent. I had 3 from competitors in the business, people that had 500 or 1,000 properties. They knew who we were. They'd come in and try to figure out a way to do it. And then the others were from people that sold a technology business, had some money, and wanted another local company. So I gained a lot of experience of letters of intent, the process to go through to kind of say, is this going to work? Is this something that'll happen? About that time, Mark Creditor, a big NARPM player in North Dallas, met Robert Way at National Realty Trust. You know them as Coldwell Banker. Somehow they met, and the Coldwell Banker people bought out Mark Creditor, Get Their First Realty, North Dallas. But they didn't buy his company. He had a lot of low-end stuff, a lot of Section 8 they didn't want. So they bought a chunk of his management accounts. And they kind of sat back for a year and started watching it because they wanted to develop a property management division for all their Coldwell Banker franchises. Okay, they have about 80% of all the Coldwell Banker franchises in America are owned by National Realty Trust. Okay, so they go out and buy a couple every month. They have a mergers and acquisitions division, very, very competent people. So Mark introduced them to me. And 4 months later, after a very deep due diligence, and they're a Fortune 500 company, they're an $8 billion a year gross revenue company. After a 4-month due diligence, they bought the company. And so Betty and I sit, with a good law firm and Ron Blue and Company around this big conference table. The stack of documents was about 4 inches thick. And they bought everything. They wanted the brand, the software, they wanted the staff, the desks, the phones, the URLs, they wanted all the intellectual property. So they bought the entire company. And it's funny, after they wired us the money, and this was a premium deal. There was no earnout. They just wired us the money and they were done. And I'm serious, afterwards, I didn't hear from them about anything. I mean, they're real estate people. So obviously they have going to figure out. Plus, they got all my staff. And I had some really senior people, paid them a lot of money. They really knew the business. I had already moved out of the office into another space. I'd go to work every day at the crack of 10 in my flip-flops and my walking shorts. And they would text me if they had a problem. And I'd walk across the lawn, come over to the office. And we would talk through a problem, and I'd send them away and go back to sleep. So for about 5 or 6 years prior to selling the company, I had physically moved away from the offices.
I actually remember that. I came and visited you for a few times over there when you were in that new office.
Yeah. Well, it's the shift that every manager needs to go through of the difference between being an owner operator and being a business owner.
Talk about that. Let's expound on that, because I think that's really important and critical for our audience, because one of the missions, Robert, of our podcast is that development, right? Like taking somebody from being what we call the technician, somebody managing properties, to running a business. And you did that. So talk a little bit about how you've had success, or how you had success, how you did that successfully.
Well, the impetus to that, and I'll give credit where credit is due, is Todd Green out of Florida. He came to NARPM 15 years ago with this video, how to run a management company from under a palm tree. And Todd's one of the elder statesmen in the business.
I need him to send me that video.
Yeah, it's on the internet somewhere. No, it's out on YouTube somewhere.
Okay.
And really, he did. I mean, he was a rock star. I knew Todd. I flew to Australia with him one time to do some training. But he would go sail fishing and he'd go to the Philippines and he'd go travel all over the place and run his business from an iPad. And so listening to Todd, I kind of realized there's going to be a point of time when I need to make this shift from being a business owner to being a business manager. And one of the elements of that is hiring and training really talented people. Okay. The book is Good to Great. Good to Great. Got to read through it about once a year. And it kind of talks about the difference of hiring great people, right? It talks about getting the right people on the bus. And when we did hiring, we'd say, look, we think you belong on the bus. Today, we think you belong as a leasing agent. But in 3 months, we might think you're much better as a property manager. And so we kind of developed this term, adopted this term of, we think you belong on the bus. Where you end up over the years will shift and move as the company grows, as the company evolves, as your learning curves accelerate, and we'll figure out what the sweet spot is for you. And we had people stay with us 20 years, and they were in 3 or 4 different positions over that 20 years. But we were willing to hire really talented people. And this was 10 years ago, 12, 14 years ago, and I'm paying $60, $70, $80, $90, $100,000 a year. And I would hire people, in some cases, Misty Withers ran the sales division for Pulte Homes. Pulte crashed, 7 and 8, like all the other builders. I hired Misty. She didn't even have a real estate license. And 5 years later, she was running the business with an NARPM designation.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great advice. We're huge Jim Collins fans, and I've actually got the book Good to Great sitting right here in front of me. So if anybody is listening to this and has not read that book, you're completely missing out if you're trying to build a business, because it is like one of the most famous business books of all time.
There's some boring research in each chapter, but the principles that they teach, it doesn't matter whether you're doing a sandwich shop or property management or manufacturing cars. Right. It's a landmark book, great book.
So we get post-transaction, you sell and you're kind of off doing your own thing. One of the things you've started doing is, you've always, I think, had a real passion for, is teaching and consulting. And talk about the last 5 or 6 years, what you've been doing and the types of things you do for property managers.
Well, about early the 2000s, I did kind of discover, if they didn't pay me, what would I do? Okay. And being in front of a group of property managers, whether it's a breakout session or a 3-hour CE class, boy, that's really what fired my engine. If you ask, what did you do that it's arduous? Sometimes you've got 101 temperature. Sometimes you haven't slept for 2 days, but you kind of come alive and your eyes start to sparkle and you have fun and the time just flies by. Okay. It's being on a platform teaching. Some of that is just ego. I get that. But I've done it 35 years. I mean, I've screwed it up so many times, I got it figured out after a while, right? And in this business, you learn 2 or 3 things every year. So if you do it 35 years, you look smart. I'm not really smart, Matt. I'm just old, and I've been doing it long enough. I've been doing it long enough that you kind of pick up things along the way. And so I knew that I'd love the training thing and the consulting, but I didn't have time to do it. So once I sold Crown, I kind of laid back and relaxed and took a nap for a week or 2. And then it's like, okay, what do I do now? And the obvious thing was lean in harder to the consulting and the training side of the business. I didn't want really to hop on airplanes too much and fly around. So the website, the Zoom meeting, the one-on-one consulting was kind of where I leaned into. I already had 100 people using our management agreement, rental agreement, a lot of our documents. So I kind of leaned harder into that. I have clients in about 20, 21 states that have gone through adopting our management agreement, and we morph it to their state laws, and our rental agreement that Monica and I developed together over 20 years, and help the client morph it to the laws of the state that they operate in. But I've got them in California and Michigan and Denver and Australia, even Australia. So helping people get on a killer management agreement, helping them grow their revenues. I would say my greatest strength is two things. It's the legal side. Twice, I considered very carefully quitting property management and going to law school. I really like the law. Part of why Monica and I get along so well together. So the whole idea of preventing litigation, body armor, how do you stay out of fist fights in the property management business? So the legal side is a great strength. And the second one is how to generate more money, not just a new fee like some people do, but I mean, really, how do you strategically run a management business to where revenues, can be much, much higher than most people think.
And talk a little bit about what type of client is like best suited. Like there's a huge, like you have people that have been doing this 20 years. You've had people that are getting in the business today. Describe who your like ideal, I know you would take on anybody, but describe an ideal client where you feel like you can add most value the fastest.
Yeah. I've really kind of gone through an awareness of that, because you're right. I like helping people, and it's not always about the money. When I sold Crown, I came out really, really well. So it's not a money issue, but money kind of defines who you deal with. Okay. And I loved working with a brand new manager because it's like their clay is really soft, right?
Right.
You can get them thinking correctly from day one, and they won't go through all the learning curves that the rest of us had to fight through. The problem is I can work with somebody for a year and I can teach them all kinds of good stuff, but since they're only managing 50 properties, I can't impact their revenue.
Right.
So I love to deal with people that have got 300 and 500 and 1,000. I've got a Jason Yoss in California, manages 1,400. He embraced our management agreement, and his testimony on our website says our gross revenue went up 650,000 in the next 12 months simply by embracing Robert's management agreement.
That's awesome.
So I can deal with a Chris Barber, or I can deal with just people, Justin Mann, who up in New Jersey, who's got 1,200 or 1,500 properties. I can substantially change their revenue streams.
Right.
I've got a new client down in Valdosta, Georgia, with 1,400, and I can show them one idea they've never heard of before, and I can change their revenue by 100 grand a year. And so the impact that I can have is so much greater with people who have got some inventory. The problem is this: if they've got 1,400, they've gone through a lot of learning curves. They think they know it all. So it's really hard to get somebody, like a Brian Jenkins, who's got 1,100, to listen to me because he thinks he knows it. Now, Brian's smart enough to realize I can impact his business in a big way. So Brian,
that's right. We know Brian. Brian's
Yeah,
right here in our backyard, and awesome guy. Yeah.
But he has embraced several things that we've introduced that, in spite of him being in the business 20 years and a rock star, obviously in the business like yourself, but I've been able to impact his business in a really big way.
Right.
Because I know how to do some things that other trainers don't know how to do.
That's a really great lead in too. One of the things you've started doing is sharing a lot of valuable information on a website you created called propertymanagementmasters.com. And what's unique about it is you're basically what I would call crowdsourcing some of the best in the business. I'm a little offended that I'm not on there, but maybe at some point you'll let me do a guest blog post. But you're crowdsourcing some of the best industry veterans in the business, people that everybody, if you've been to a NARPM conference, you'll recognize a lot of these names, to basically answer a lot of specific property management questions. So tell us a little bit, like why go from consulting to this website, and how does this kind of fit into the Robert Locke ecosystem?
Good. Well, but first of all, let me clarify. The website where I put on my documents and videos is called trainingpropertymanagers.com. Trainingpropertymanagers.com. That's Robert's website. Okay. And they can get documents and customized management agreements. I think there's 450 videos on it. I mean, it's got a lot of stuff. Okay.
Right.
But over the last 10 years, Monica and I have accumulated 90,000 emails of property managers. Obviously, that's way bigger than NARPM, right? 6,000, 7,000 at NARPM. So this is IMN, this is anybody out there that claims to be in some phase of property management. Okay. Some of that is apartment industry, right? Some of that is HOA. Most of it is property management. And what I tried to do is assemble veterans in the business, masters of the business, and bring them in as contributing authors. And so what they do is they write an article or they put on a video, and we send out an electronic email to everybody who has subscribed and drive the reader to that trainer, to that property manager. In other words, we're not trying to sell anything on that site. We have nothing to sell on that site. We are trying to promote masters in the industry to the people to the customer base of the property management industry, not to owners. This is not to owners. This is to property management people in the industry.
That makes sense.
So,
sorry, Robert, to interrupt, but that makes sense why I'm not on there. I'm not a master. I may be a veteran, but not a master yet. That's I don't have my property management black belt yet.
Here's the truth of the matter, and I didn't want to embarrass you here, but I sent you an email on this, and I think at the time you were buying out my client over in Tennessee. And so you were too busy to respond. But when I thought,
I'm glad you said that.
I thought Brian Jenkins, I thought, well, the heck with Brian Jenkins, the rock star is Matthew Whitaker.
Brian would probably beg to differ. We need to have Brian on here at some point, but yeah, Brian would probably beg to differ. No, if you saw my email, Robert, I have 25,000 unread emails in my inbox. So
that surprised me.
It is reasonable to think that maybe it got lost in the shuffle. I actually do remember you asking me though. So I appreciate
it's not too late. It's not too late.
All right. Well, maybe
let me tell you who joined this week. We got Jordan Mueller joined this week as a contributing author. Kurt McGarry. Kurt McGarry built Real Property Management franchise, right?
Wow.
And then he built Abodia, right?
Wow.
And so he's a veteran of the business. We've got people like Daniel Craig, Kathleen Richards. I mean, these are trainers, right?
Right.
And then we've got property managers like you and Brian Jenkins and Andy Propus and Kit Guerin, David Holtz.
What are you waiting on, Matthew? What are you doing?
I know these are all our competitors in the business, and the fact that you're just ripping off our competitors' names right here on our podcast.
I know. Seriously.
What we're gonna do though, Robert, when we launch this podcast, we're just gonna beep out these names like you're slinging curse words on our podcast.
So let's talk about your business, because here's where Monica and I have been kind of focusing a lot of time. To grow Crown, we acquired 14 other management companies over the years, usually mostly through the 90s and early 2000s. Now, most of them were small, 50, 75. I think the biggest one was 250. But we got some learning curves through it, right? Got through some learning curves. Then we crashed once, right? And then we sold out to a Fortune 500. So since then, I've brokered 6 other companies. You bought one of them.
I did.
I bought one of them over in Nashville. Had a client die. The widow wanted to get out. I put an executive summary together. I sent you a copy. And I'm telling you, Matthew, I've never seen anybody move as fast and efficiently as you did. And I tell this story quite a bit. We had a letter of intent the last 2 days of October, and you closed November 30th.
Yep.
I mean, that is the fastest I have ever seen it done. Applause, applause.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to put you on our commercial now, and you'll be the voice of the Evernest acquisitions.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
right.
I mean, it was a good price. You got a good book of business. The guy used all of our documents. He was making great money. And
there's no doubt. Yeah, it was an unfortunate situation, and it had, acting fast was obviously because there was nobody driving the ship anymore, and it was important that we got it done quickly. But
it was today. I'm representing a buyer for a company in North Carolina, and I'm representing a seller of a company in New Jersey. So I've got clients, and I get people called because Monica's handled the legal side of about 12. So together we've done plus 30. Okay, so we're starting to do training, 3-hour CE classes, videos, maybe a webinar along the way to help people begin to think through. We did a NARPM conference a year ago in Connecticut, and the 50-minute breakout session was staging your company to sell.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a strength for us.
Yeah, no, I like having a company that is ready to be sold, that has all their stuff together, is way easier for somebody who's generally on the buy side. It's nice to come in and be able to believe P&Ls, be able to believe the software, the trust accounts are reconciled. It's just a really nice thing to be able to come in as a buyer. And yeah, you pay a premium for stuff you have clear visibility. Anytime you're a buyer and there's big question marks in your head, how do you overcome those question marks? You basically discount the price because you don't know what the answer is. And the more clear you can get, the better off you are.
It took NRT 4.5 months to do their due diligence after the LOI was signed on Crown.
Oh, wow.
Now, they were buying the company. They were buying the company, okay?
Right.
So they had to do a much deeper due diligence.
Right. Wow. I bet that was pretty probing when a bunch of Fortune 500 attorneys come and analysts and accountants come ask questions. That doesn't sound like a 4 or 5 months that I would want to be a part of.
Fortunately, I had dealt with 6 other letter of intents where all those people wanted that kind of stuff, and I had already developed all of that information.
Yeah, that's great.
That helps.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, this has really been awesome. I love kind of getting to hear kind of your track through the business, and you are a master in this world. And so, very excited to have had you on the show. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your, I would say busy, but you're not busy schedule since now that you're retired and just consulting, but I know it's still a busy schedule. So thanks for being on.
I loved it. Thank you so much for the courtesy and the acknowledgement to have me on, Matthew. Thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. This has been great, Robert. So if you've listened to this, if you found value, we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast, share it with other property managers in the business that you know, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another PM Vet episode. So we'll be back.